All right. Okay, here we go. It is May 4th. May the 4th be with you, as the Star Wars folks say, before Cinco de Mayo. It is a beautiful day. We are all spread out. We had a great guest today, but before we get rolling, let's have Dr. John Sibley Butler play some music.
Operator, why don't you help me place this call? You see the number on the matchbook is old and faded. She's living in LA with my best old ex-friend Ray.
Excellent. How are you doing, John Butler?
I am doing just fine. It's a great day in Austin, Texas. There's a lot of stuff going on in Austin, Texas. From our city council want to give people $1,000 a month because everything went up in Austin, Texas, to the whole idea, will we have a grid? What will happen to the grid? These are the conversations. And then the war, of course, in my class, in my undergraduate class, of course, I have students from Europe, and they're debating whether or not they want to go back home or not, which I'd never heard before. They might want to live in Austin, Texas. Then, of course, there's the economy and everything a little inflated now. And then we're between this gasoline and this electric car stuff. So there are lots of debates going on. But in Austin, Texas, we talk about great days like this. It's good to be in Austin. And we really get upset when people leave Austin and go to places like California. I mean, it's really upsetting. Why would Craig leave Austin, Texas and find himself in the People's Republic? It's really, really interesting.
It's purely necessity, business trip, making it as short as possible. I will be back in Austin tonight, actually. So,
well, I was just wondering. Okay,
yeah.
I'm doing good.
Yeah.
Let me say quickly hi to Llewelyn King. Llewelyn, how are you, sir?
Very well, sir. I've been traveling, but I'm returned to East Texas, also known as Rhode Island, and I find the whole chauvinism about Austin intriguing, and not totally comprehensible. I do like the way John Sibley Butler, though, my dear friend, sits with all those books behind him, signaling erudition.
That is my home office. The bad thing is every one of them are digital now.
That's right.
Do it anymore. You can't put the books you read up on the shelf to impress people, because now I read them all on a Kindle.
Amazing. Me too.
Yeah.
However, I was with a bunch of people yesterday, and I was explaining the virtues of Kindle, and one gal at the table said she had found the same thing, that if you have an electronic reader, it's so efficient. You begin to read in all kinds of 10 minutes here, 5 minutes there, waiting for the doctor, waiting for that, waiting for, it just increases the amount you read effortlessly.
And Llewellyn, this is my home office, and the entire office is all books all around me.
Yeah.
That's from the old days.
Yeah.
Anyway, all is well here, and nice to be with you chaps again. I didn't think I was going to make it because of the unreliability of modern airlines, but I did make it. I did get up at 4:30 this morning in order to grace your presence, Andres, and I hope you take due recognition of that huge sacrifice on my part in order to come and joust with John Sibley Butler, which is the true purpose of this program, is jousting with John Sibley Butler. We disguise it by saying it's about digital 360.
Thank you, Llewellyn. You're a good guy.
I appreciate the effort, Llewellyn. Let me say hello to our guest speaker today. Lawrence, how are you, sir?
Doing very well. Nice to be with you.
Excellent. Craig, you are in California taking a quick trip, and where are you again?
San Carlos, California. California, the state, in a just surprising twist in my world, that is desperately trying to kill net metering, how we compensate solar owners for their extra solar produced, while the state of Florida the governor just vetoed a bill that was trying to kill net metering. And so
That's right.
everyone in my world is kind of turned upside down trying to figure out what's going on.
You know, leave it to the lobbyists to change the predicament of conservatism or liberalism. It never makes sense. Fascinating. Let me introduce you formally for those that are watching and listening and don't know you well. Craig Loris is partner and co-founder of a new venture firm in Austin called Energy Transition Venture. It's a very apropos name. And he's going to be with us for the hour, and we look forward to his insights and sharing about his journey. Prior to ETV, if I may shrink wrap it that way, he was VP of Products at Treverity, VP of Products and Marketing at SunPower, General Manager of Residential Business at SunEdison, investor at Axel Partners, which is where I believe we met.
Correct.
Practice lead at IDEO, the design company, the well-renowned design company. Research and development engineer at Gyration, and a project engineer at Engineering Dynamics. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Mechanical Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin, another Longhorn, and a PhD in Mechanical Engineering from Stanford University, also a Cardinal. Welcome to the show.
Like I said, it's great to be here. Really enjoy the banter with you guys, listening to these events, and happy to join in.
Absolutely. Well, Craig, you've decided that you're going to close your chapter in Live Venture Capital, which is a phenomenal platform in many ways. Curious from your perspective, sort of global West Coast, Texas, Gulf Coast purview, what you see happening sort of the last 18 months, COVID. We talk a lot about in the show that COVID is an accelerator to digitalization. It should be helping technology. Curious if you have any examples or how that's manifesting itself. And then, that does the current construct of economy worry you as a venture investor? Do you see things tightening up? You have dry powder. You're going to burn some of that powder.
Yeah.
Inflation. What's going on in your mind? So COVID in the economy in 2022.
That's a lot. Well, I will say I did venture investing in this area in energy and what we called clean tech at the time, back about a decade ago, and it was a boom time for that. There was a lot of money, early stage venture capital pouring into solar, batteries, electric vehicles, smart grid, Andres, which I know you were heavily involved with back then, and I got a seat at one of the best venture capital firms in the world, this firm, Excel Partners, and got to sort of watch some of the best investors try to digest this craziness of, Silicon Valley VCs investing in energy companies. And that vantage point taught me a lot of lessons. It was a bloodbath for many people. Many of those investors are no longer in those categories. They lost a lot of money, some of the lessons from that have informed sort of why I jumped back in it now. And we based our firm in Texas. We think Texas is the energy capital of the US for sure, but really one of the energy capitals of the world. My partner's in Houston. All the major energy companies are there. And what we've seen in the last 2 years that I think has been accelerated by COVID, but I think also is somewhat coincidental, is just a massive push by corporations and institutions to decarbonize. So you see every major oil and gas company announcing very large pools of capital to focus on decarbonization. You see all the financial investors focusing on new types of energy and new types of infrastructure for that energy. And literally, I mean, this is really a very, very recent phenomenon. I do think COVID accelerated it. the war, if anything, is another accelerant. It's obviously a big part of our reaction to this war is about energy and about Russia supplying gas to Europe primarily, and how dangerous that is. So it's a really exciting time. Myself and my partner, we kind of looked at the space and said, look, there's a lot of money coming in from people who look to be very serious, but there's not a lot of early stage venture capital that are, finding and incubating these companies in their earliest stage. A lot of the people who did that the last time around got out. There's a lot of new people coming in doing it. So we kind of saw an opportunity for us as people who had been through one cycle, have worked in those industries to kind of do the investing. And we launched it a year ago. I would say that the thing that's the scariest thing for me in my sector is, and I think people talk about this, I think people understand about it, is how much of the energy transition supply chain is dependent on one country, China. And that's a thing I think about all the time, whether it's solar, wind turbines, batteries, even newer technologies like electrolyzers for green hydrogen. China is dominant, and unlike oil and gas, where we can at least supply a lot of our energy needs with domestic sources, in this case we really have basically zero. And so I think about that as I'm investing in these companies. It's kind of an overarching worry and trying to understand how our companies will navigate that. For example, if China decided they didn't want to supply this company with something.
Yeah, Craig, that's very interesting. Let me first, I want to ask two questions. The first question about where you are in place. And when we started the Austin experiment, we knew that I look at the state of Texas as a machine. That is, Austin added high tech, quote unquote, and Houston has always been oil and gas. San Antonio has always been military, and Houston is corporate, and Dallas is real corporate. That is, when I go to Dallas, I rent me a Rolls Royce and put a suit on so I can feel at home. My question is, when you look at where you are, how have you bridged, I would say, the gap between the energy sector, which is really East Texas and Houston, and the technology of investing in Austin? When I was director of IC Square, I had my first clean energy conference back in 2002. There was a lot of excitement, and then the excitement went away because what I found was that there was a disconnect between the new ideas in Austin and the old ideas in Houston. Yeah. So my next question is a simple one. Would you pull back on all drilling for oil and gas as we go forward?
So my answer to that doesn't really engender me to a lot of my peers in the space, where I'm not out to crush the oil and gas industry. I think we called it energy transition ventures for a purpose, because I don't think we can shut off whether it's nuclear, whether it's drilling for oil and gas. I think a transition takes time, and I think the oil and gas industry needs to remain healthy to sort of survive that transition. And so, no, I would not shut down because I don't think we're ready to. I think we're not as far away. I do think the demand reduction for those products is going to be very real over the next decades. And I think, in the electricity sector, for example, in the transportation sector next. So yeah, I'm not one calling for shutting things down, though. I do think we need an order. I do think we can shut down coal. I do think we can finally put a nail in the coffin of coal, but certainly not yet gas and not yet oil.
Okay, Llewellyn?
Very interesting. Craig, when you looked, I want to salute you right hard for your drawing attention to the hideous dependence we have on China. That if you take something like lithium and you say, well, it comes from Australia and South America, then you find it has to go to China to be processed. Likewise, rare earths, we can produce them elsewhere in the world, but they end up going through China. So we might as well use the Chinese rare earths. We've slid into a vicious dependence on China. And all of the new technologies tend to be more dependent on China than the old ones. Windmills, for example, depend very heavily, or wind turbines, I should say, on rare earths access through China, which was not true when we were using fossil fuels, where there was no need to have a Chinese component. But we went out and essentially bought a Chinese component with the bulk electric power system, particularly when it comes to operational technologies on those systems. We don't know to what extent they've been modified by the Chinese for future use against us. It's a very disturbing thing. So I salute you. And I wonder how you are able to direct your investments in new technologies, avoiding the Chinese trap.
Unfortunately, I mean, right now it's not avoidable because it so dominates everything. So I think about it as you know, and at the stages of the companies where we're investing, the supply chain is not the biggest problem they have, because they're often pre-commercial. And so in some ways I think about it a lot. I do try to not get myself as you know, 100% boxed in, but on the other hand, I kind of have to let it ride with the rest of the industry, and work towards, you know, I'm a big supporter of bringing some of this technology to the US and other places in the world. We have an investment in a company that makes electrolyzers for green hydrogen, and they've set up their manufacturing and the bulk of their supply chain in India. And because the math did not pencil out in the US, they tried and they couldn't. And because they're going to be competing with Chinese made electrolyzers. So yeah.
I was wondering if you could give us, that's very interesting that electrolyzers are one of the things that you've invested in. It seemed like me a rather solid investment. What other things have you invested in looking to the future? The utility industry is never before is in transition.
Yes. Yeah, no, it really is. So that, you know, that's a fun one. I think hydrogen, you know, people talk about hydrogen in multiple ways, but, you know, as essentially a new fuel. We made this investment. We don't need the world to switch over to hydrogen as a fuel source, because we produce a tremendous amount of hydrogen today for industrial purposes, for oil and gas refining, for steel making, for glass making. Hydrogen is produced, and it's produced from natural gas. You strip off the carbon and you get CO2. So just sort of trying to, you know, get economically competitive with those applications is a huge market and reduces CO2. But then there's also people talking about it for transportation and for you know, for actual power generation and for storage. So those are all interesting areas. We invested in a power electronics company called Resilient Power. They're actually based in Austin, and they are working on solid state transformers that would essentially take what is, if you look at a medium voltage transformer that, you know, steps down the voltage from the, you know, the power lines, the distribution lines, to something that you can use. They are just big hunks of metal, right? Copper and steel. And so people have been working on using semiconductors, silicon carbide and silicon, to, you know, sort of to digitize that process of changing the voltage. So this company has a digital transformer technology that's really exciting, and their first application will be for EV charging. So yeah, so
if there's one place where dependent the electric system, it's on transformers, which you know, all large transformers come from China, and there's some questions about the integrity of them.
Yep. So this takes a transformer, shrinks it down by an order of magnitude, increases its efficiency by a meaningful amount, and essentially lowers the entire footprint of the product of things like steel and copper. and then has a much more functionality. It's essentially as a smart transformer. You can convert the medium voltage to just about whatever you want with these units. And like I said, they're going to go after initially DC fast chargers. So if you if you're a industrial user of vehicles, like a company like Amazon that has large fleets that is working on switching over to electric vehicles, they're going to have to build a ton of charging infrastructure. And this looks like a really good technology for that. And they're one of their corporate venture funds, they have a climate pledge fund co-invested in that investment with us. So
Brilliant.
yeah, so we like renewables, we like EVs, we like energy storage. Again, all the things that are highly dependent on China. There's a number of sort of digital and software technologies that are of interest to us. Yeah, so we have, we've done about 4 investments so far. We're not a high volume investment shop. We're very careful and selective, and we're excited about.
We have a question from the audience about what's your take on small nuclear?
It's interesting. So we have not spent a lot of time on nuclear because I don't think it's really suitable for the type of venture investing we do. Just the capital intensity of those businesses, the regulatory risk, and the time horizons. I am a very pro-nuclear. I think there's a ton of interesting work going on in small modular reactors, in fusion. I mean, it may still be a long ways away, but there is progress being made. And frankly, I would like to see in the US for sure, but globally, the nuclear industry kind of get back on its feet and figure out how to build more affordable reactors. And not shut down reactors that we can keep running, which they're planning to do in a number of places. Because I'm realistic. I think solar and wind and batteries are great. For supply chain reasons and just physics reasons, man, it's hard to beat nuclear as a baseload source of power.
Absolutely. So Craig, real quick, a bit of a fast questions and reactions from you on energy. Your thoughts on you like EVs. So what's your thought of the Ford F-150 Lightning, which I have a down payment for? Are you going to buy one and run your house from it and never buy residential energy?
I have a reservation as well. I was disappointed. I don't think I'm in this year's batch of production. Right. So absolutely, that was one of the most exciting announcements for me. Because it signified to me that a major automaker, I mean, Tesla obviously is a major automaker now, but like one of the other major automakers was truly serious, because they're electrifying both the Mustang and the F-150, which are their flagship vehicles. Everybody else is kind of creating new throwaway brands or throwaway models that they can, if it doesn't work out, they can just kind of pretend it never happened. But Ford is betting the farm, and I've been waiting for someone to do the, kind of vehicle to grid, vehicle to home. And I think it's huge. I mean, I think EVs are going to change the grid. People are worried about it, the grid can't handle all these EVs. I kind of say the grid can't handle not having these EVs, because they are the most flexible source of both demand and generation, both in time and space. Right? You've got a mobile giant battery pack that you can plug into the grid literally almost anywhere. And so I get very excited about that. Yeah. So I'm pro Ford F-150.
Absolutely. How do you see the movement of smart buildings and smart cities arriving to the conclusion that every building in America, home, office, hospital, grocery store, should become its own power plant and basically reinvent the way this generation is made and managed?
Very bullish on that. I mean, it's already happening. People were talking about it a decade ago, but it really wasn't a thing. The world consisted of demand response, which was, if the grid had some trouble, the person at the utility would call the big industrial factory, and they had a deal with, if you would turn down or shut off, we'll pay you some money. That was the that was the extent of it. It wasn't very smart and not very flexible. And, I think now the technology exists to, like you just said, turn every building into, a part of a virtual power plant. And there are now, the issue is no longer technology, it's markets and regulation and market structures on, how do you pay for that capability? How do you get paid for that capability as a building owner or a homeowner?
Absolutely. Another quick question. We all know about Hurricane Maria taking down Puerto Rico, decimating Puerto Rico, and then Puerto Rico eventually getting a loan from the US and rebuilding its grid. And Puerto Rico used to be a single grid, all integrated with a lot of transmission lines on the north side of the island, and the population is primarily on the south side of the island. And the grid has been rebuilt into 7 microgrids. A lot of people argue that Texas as a standalone grid is a mistake, that we should be part of the Western or Eastern interconnect. Do you see actually a shift from thinking towards microgrids for resiliency and hardening and actually transforming the Eastern and the Western interconnect more into smaller ERCOTs?
Yeah. So I think microgrids are fascinating. I mean, the concept's been around a long time, but it was always about, diesel generators, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's, people have been doing microgrids with generators forever. It's now kind of got a little bit of sex appeal with solar and batteries on top of that. And so, at the micro scale, at the building scale, I think there's some really interesting things going on with microgrids, both for resiliency and for participating in markets and sort of being that power plant. And then on the larger scale, the question of whether Texas should connect. I think it's so complicated that I don't really have a strong opinion on it yet. I don't really know. What I will say is whether or not they do that, we're still going to have transmission bottlenecks in the state. And I think the best thing we could do in Texas right now, and this applies to a lot of regions, is invest in more transmission. But like in a lot of areas, we've just sort of become kind of unable to do big things like that. It's just become too political, too expensive. And so, but I mean, we've got a lot of solar and wind resource in West Texas that on critical times can't get to the east. And you end up curtailing this solar and wind and just basically wasting it. And it's a shame. So I think we need to invest both at the transmission level and at the distribution level to just sort of manage what's fundamentally a new reality is we're building energy, we're creating energy differently than we did even a decade ago.
Yeah, Craig, I want to go back to the supply chain. As I learned from Llewellyn, if you don't have the chemicals, everything, then you're just dead anyway. Let's go back. I worked with Steve Bannon some years back on bringing manufacturing back, the supply chain back to America, or back to the Western Hemisphere, whether it was in Puerto Rico or wherever. And my question is, I thought that Congress had a program that said the following: if we could bring the supply chain back to America, then there will be funds to help that company sell it and put up and do well in America. And the second thing, when you look at that, it was a part of the rebuilding the technology kind of process. Matter of fact, I think I just sent you, I'm working with a company now called FlexForge. And all of our plugins, Llewellyn, are done in China. All the mechanisms that it takes to plug a car in, done in China.
The connectors.
Have you heard anything about the relationship between Congress and the Senate in bringing the supply chain back to the western part of the world?
So I think there's been a number of times, and let's just take solar for an example, because it's been they in the industry, they call it the solar coaster, because we go through constant supply and demand shocks, and often they're government triggered. So, right. a tariff will get triggered on imports. of solar panels, and the industry will just like freeze, right? And it throws everything out of whack because people are developing projects several years in advance and putting in assumptions on costs of equipment based on that, and then all of a sudden you just increase your cost 50% and the project doesn't pencil. And so there's been this constant effort to get domestic solar panel manufacturing, and at various periods of time we've had it. I remember going to a grand opening in Oregon, Hillsboro, of Solar World, which is a German company, opened a state-of-the-art solar panel manufacturing facility in Hillsboro. That just I believe it's gone through several different hands, but I think it's done. I'm not sure if it's manufacturing anymore. But we've been unable despite many attempts by the government of encouraging, incentivizing, both with carrot and stick, like programs like you described, and then tariff on imports. We are just so hungry for cheap stuff that we can't seem to make it happen. We cannot seem. There is domestic solar manufacturing. There's a company, First Solar, which is one of the leading solar companies. That's a U.S. company manufacturing in the U.S. and other places, but not China. And it can be done. They happen to have a differentiated technology. They're not competing head to head in a commodity technology space. That's where it really gets hard. If you're not building something differentiated, all the tariffs in the world, the Chinese government and manufacturers are really good around getting around those tariffs. They will set up shop in Vietnam or the Philippines or somewhere that's not part of the tariff, and it happens. So yeah, I support, I think it's worthy of our taxpayer dollars to invest in this and at least getting some of this infrastructure here, and not being 100% dependent. It's one thing if it was multiple countries, but it's one country.
Yeah, well, finally, if the Japanese said if everybody were to drive a electric car, the country would fall apart. Do you think that in Andre's world of kilowatts and gigawatts, if all of a sudden all Americans went to electric cars, what would that do to us in terms of demand in the grid? And quite frankly, can it be done even in the next 5 years?
So I'm less worried about that for two reasons. One is you just can't switch over that fast, right? Like there's just consumer behavior and just the existing fleet, and cars last 10 to 15 years. They may go through multiple owners, but it's practically can't happen that fast for that reason, plus the supply chain reason, which is, the people are ramping up battery capacity for that and electric motors and all those things. So there's that part, but even let's just sort of take that away and say, hey, look, can the grid handle half of all the cars we have today as EVs or 3/4? And I think the answer, I'm much less worried than many about that, because like I said, EVs are the ultimate inflexible load. You can shift the load both in time, meaning I can charge, I can throttle my charging when instructed via, signal. That's already happening today. I can, and the average driver drives 30 miles a day, and the EVs will have 300-mile range. So there are obviously sometimes it's critical, you have to charge now, but there's a lot of flexibility into when you can charge. And we have lots of unused capacity at night and other times. And then also where, right? You can move you can move it to a different location and charge. So, and like with the F-150, it can actually support the grid if needed. It can discharge. Now, I don't expect that's going to happen a lot, because you don't want to cycle your battery for that. But so I am not worried. I think we have to upgrade the grid regardless. If it's not EVs, I mean, look what's happening with cryptocurrency in Texas. I mean, we are building gigawatts worth of crypto mining facilities in the state of Texas and elsewhere, that are going to stress the grid substantially. All right, we're building 1 million plus new houses in the U.S., which are all more load than an EV.
Yeah.
So I think we have to. I'm a believer in energy abundance. So I think we can have it all and have it clean, not right away, but I think that's what we should be shooting for. And I think electrifying is the key to decarbonizing, because we know how to decarbonize the electric grid. We don't know how to decarbonize, how to produce heat very well, and how to, and other things. So from gas. So that's.
Let me add some colors from the consulting work that we do all the time to the comments. So for those of you who are listening, it takes, in order to mine 1 Bitcoin today, it takes 86 megawatt hours. That's 86 megawatt hours to mine 1 Bitcoin. And you probably know that a megawatt produces enough energy to keep up about 3,000 homes alive. So 86 megawatt hours for 1 Bitcoin. In terms of the vehicles, we talk about this all the time, that ERCOT is on, rounded up an 80 gigawatt hour service territory on a monthly basis. If we took all the 22 million registered vehicles in Texas and made them electric, let's say with a 100 kilowatt hour battery, you would end up, if they all needed to plug at the same time, which it won't be the case, but just to do the math, make it simple, right? It would be 2,200 gigawatt hours needed versus the 80 that we produce today. So obviously, we will need to produce more energy as we electrify. The question will be, how much more do we need to manage and cycle all those vehicles, in an efficient basis, and have all the benefits and conveniences of having them available when we need them. And so I say that turning off anything that is generation, it's probably a mistake today, because we don't know what we don't know about the challenges of having so many vehicles on the grid. But we are doing at Texas State a lot of modeling right now, helping ERCOT figure out what would happen to the grid if 10 million vehicles were electric and they were run around, and you can move them around to help the grid. And that would be, so that's quite an interesting exercise of some of the things that we're doing. So, Llewellyn?
I think this is very interesting. I'd like to ask Craig. He's invested in storage, and I'm not really so interested in where he's invested, or so necessary that he explain that. But in the course of coming to that investment, he must have looked at a lot of storage, a lot of technologies, hoping to make it. And these, we know the names: compressed air, pump storage, the old favorite, batteries, both lithium ion and iron air, and liquid air ion, and good old and trustworthy lead acid, all made in the US, by the way, not needing a Chinese component. Yet it does seem that we continue to emphasize lithium ion. I understand that there's an installation of an enormous 350 megawatts of battery in California. Did you see anything else that was interesting? Not that you've necessarily invested in it.
Yeah.
What's the product of your research?
There is so much interesting activity in this area, and we have not done a direct energy storage investment yet. We haven't not found one that we wanted to invest in. I have a couple thoughts on this. First of all, there are so many ways to store energy. It's literally, like you said, there's gravity, there's compressed air, there's compressed other fluids, there's and then there's a bazillion different chemistries, the electrochemistries to store, and then there's flow batteries. So and this is not really new today. What a lot of these technologies have been kind of being worked on for 10, 20, 30, 50 years. And what has happened, and I learned a valuable lesson in solar that I think applies here when I was early investing. Silicon, the basic material used for solar panels today, was very expensive just to make the wafers, process them, turn them into cells, build a module. Solar 12 years ago, 15 years ago was very, very expensive. And a lot of it was made in China, but a lot of it was made in Europe, Japan, Korea, the US. It was not clear what was going to be and then there were a lot of people working on competing materials to make it cheaper. So there were, everyone remembers Cylindra, if you're old enough. That was a specific type of material called SIGs, which there were probably 10 to 15 well-funded companies working on that technology because it promised
It was very interesting technology.
Yeah, it was and still is. And there were a bunch of other things. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
It's become a whipping boy, but I remember filming some of these. They're circular. They weren't flat panels. They were circular panels.
Yep.
And I thought, this is different. This is interesting. This is possibilities.
Yes. There were a lot of interesting things. And then what happened? Well, the Chinese government decided to invest heavily in their domestic solar production. Mm-hmm. And before you knew it, they drove down the cost of solar panels to levels that nobody thought they could get to in single digit years. Meanwhile, all these new technologies, which were kind of in the lab, in pilots and early, their target changed, right? They were trying to compete with this, $2-4 a watt solar panel. And then all of a sudden it's 40 cents a watt solar panel. And they didn't have the ability to compete on costs. And many of them just vanished. They just shut down. So batteries, I see the same thing playing out. The world, not just China, but the world, Korea is a big supplier in this case, although the world has picked this technology, right? And you've got a multi-billion-dollar global effort around supporting lithium ion. And there's variations in chemistry within the lithium ion, but essentially lithium ion. And when I look at a startup or an early phase company that is trying to compete, I always go like, what are you trying to compete on? Because if it's cost, I don't think you're ever going to win. You're not going to be able to catch that falling knife of lithium ion. I think if you're competing on some performance metrics or, has some kind of niche applications, it gets interesting to look at. But I fear that we are in for, much like solar, a decade or more of domination of this lithium ion chemistry. And I say I fear it. It's not, I think it's great. I mean, the fact that the cost is so low and it dropping, it's enabling so many things that are happening now. But we're not investing in those other technologies. And as an early stage venture investor, I don't have enough money to go compete with that, right? Like with the whole world. I mean, there are
certain advantages to lithium ion. It's light, it has very high energy density. This can't be said of its competitors. All of those that I look at would be fine for utility or stationary use, but they're not going to be used in any mobile way at all. And if you start changing the chemistry of the lithium ion, you tend to lose. I mean, it's not impossible, but on today's technology, you lose energy density. If you strip out, say, nickel or strip out cobalt, or you can work around those ingredients, but you have you lose energy density. That's what I'm told.
So let me add some color and then ask a question for Craig. So Craig, there are two things on energy storage that are really seminal. FERC order 841, which allows for the retail injection of ownership of energy storage into the grid. And then FERC Order 2222, which allows for the aggregation of that. Obviously, ERCOT in Texas is not a FERC territory, but we do have an equivalent law that just got passed, Senate Bill 415, that basically says that a third-party entity aggregating energy storage can partner with the grid operators to provide all the virtues of energy storage. So the question is, fixed storage on the grid doesn't need to be light, doesn't need to be lithium. The heavier, the better. The longer lasting, the better. Do you see that as a sort of a breakup, a fork in the road, where iron phosphate or whatever chemistry is going to be dominates the grid of the future because energy storage is sort of the ultimate, holy grail?
So as an engineer, I was trained as an engineer, that makes complete sense to me, that we shouldn't have the same technology, like that the same technology that's great for an electric vehicle or my phone shouldn't necessarily be the right solution for large grid scale storage. Like there's no natural reason it should be, but there is just something about economies of scale. And again, we saw it in solar. I mean, the same technology we use in residential is virtually identical to what we use in large utility scale on the solar panels. And it's like, well, why not develop a product, just purposely more suited for that? And the reality is it's cost. It all just comes down to cost. And counterintuitively, Elon Musk decided to put a bunch of laptop batteries in a car, which made no sense to anybody. It's like, why would you just do thousands of laptop batteries versus just building one big one? And he was right, because he was leveraging economies of scale, supply chains, manufacturing capability, versus building your own kind of one-off thing. And so that's the struggle for those other technologies for stationary energy storage. We watch them really closely. I'm just scared to bet against lithium ion. I'm just scared because it's become very powerful, and you could lose just because you can't get momentum. Right.
Yeah, I think what we're saying here, look, there's so much technology that will evolve. I mean, I see so much stuff. I see human body, the heat from the human body recharging cell phones. I see all kinds of technologies that's evolving. So I think what we're saying here is that as we move forward in the second battery revolution, then technologies will change, technologies will get better, entrepreneurs will enter the space, and we will have a transition. And the question is, how long will it take? And you remember, it's different from going from horse and buggies to the combustion engine. I mean, it's very, very different. And what's different about it is that Americans just could not conceive of getting rid of the horse. But we can conceive of getting rid of combustion engines. And I think that's a big thing. So I think that's what we're talking about here. Throughout the conversation is Llewellyn's idea that entrepreneurs will come in and save the day with new technologies and new ideas, and they will provide the charging spaces. And we charge at home. We will not go around town just to charge. We'll charge when we sleep. Like you said, Craig, a lot of good things happen at night for electrical charging. So I think that's what we're saying here. We're in the Schumpeter transition.
Yeah, I was gonna ask Craig on another topic. When I was at Austin Energy, and the epiphany of building the first smart grid in the world came to my head as you apply computing and software and telecom to the power infrastructure. It becomes clear to me going forward that everything that we're talking about in terms of the digitalization of the grid and decarbonization of the planet, that it's not going to happen unless we have plenty of broadband capability. So what are your thoughts, Craig, of the necessary dependency between this smart energy world of the future and broadband, 5G, 6G? What are your thoughts?
So a couple of thoughts. One, I think it's criminal to build an energy asset, or really any critical infrastructure asset, that's not at least monitored, if not intelligent and connected, right? I mean, it's just, we are, even with smart meters, in many ways, we're blind on the grid as to what's going on. Because the smart meters tell you some things, but like I remember learning when I was with the company Treverity and we were doing work with utilities, a lot of utilities don't really know their grid topology, how everything's connected, because some lineman will go out to, do something, and it turns out he connected the home to a different, the transformer differently, and it's a different leg of the transformer, and like, there's a lot of still paper and manual throwing of switches and things like that. So yeah, I think it's awesome. I got really excited. I listened to, it was last week, a couple weeks ago, the LoRaWAN, what companies like Helium are doing to sort of like, to sort of proliferate these sort of low power, low bandwidth networks, perfect for sort of sensing and monitoring. And so, yeah, I mean, I think I'm a big believer we're going to, essentially end up with a digital twin of the entire world, and that there's going to be a lot of benefits from that. I think there's a lot of stuff like blocking and tackling around energy that is, that is maybe not dependent on that. But I get excited, and we're interested in technologies. It's not clear to me what the role is for early stage venture capital in that world today. But we're on the lookout. That's sort of in scope for us, is kind of, under the label of smart grid, smart cities, smart buildings. We want to, we look for companies that are figuring out how to help everything run better and work better.
Last but not least, Craig, I can't let you go if I don't ask you, being a Longhorn and a Stanford guy, what are your thoughts and your appetite for investing in AI and machine learning applied to energy?
That's an interesting question. I have an opinion on that, which is, there's a lot of companies. So what's happens now with startups is every startup is an AI company now. Like, I don't know how they became an AI company. I didn't know there were that many AI experts in the world, but everyone and a lot, the word is thrown around quite liberally. A lot of times you look under the hood and it's an algorithm, right? Like I would have called that, okay, yeah, it's a computer program. It's not like truly learning and truly intelligent. I actually, I don't get that excited about that. I haven't seen the sort of fundamental applications that truly have massive impact when it comes to that. I think it's an important tool. I think people are doing stuff using what are essentially now, off-the-shelf packages and tools that are available to make smarter controls and smarter systems. I think it's important. I'm not sure that it in itself is a category that I've yet seen something that I wanted to invest just in the AI technology itself. But we do see a lot of our companies utilizing machine learning and AI to do their work better. But it's I don't know whether or not it's truly fundamental to the energy transition.
That's a good point. Now, clearly the other element, and this will transition to John Butler, is a lot of these new paradigms and new technologies are pushing new business models. And we talk a lot about how the gig economy and derivatives of the gig economy is what's going to transform the grid, energy, the delivery of it, the use of it, when companies like Google and Facebook and Amazon get involved. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I have a talk that I used to give talking about the energy transition, and I talk about all the other industries that have gone from these centralized structures and networks, right? Whether it's finance, hotels, driving, taxis. We've sort of used technology to enable consumers to be producers, essentially. And I think the exact same thing is happening in energy. I think we are becoming, the technology now exists and early adopters are becoming, grid interactive, right? If you bought a battery system and you're in California, you're participating in some kind of program where, you're a participant in the grid. You're not just a passive consumer anymore.
Yeah.
And I see that as fundamentally changing every industry that exists. Maybe not nuclear. Like, I don't know if everyone's going to have a nuclear reactor in their home, but some people think that's the case.
Mr. Fusion.
Yeah, that's right. And so that's one of the sort of overarching sort of trends in the world and in technology that I think is energy will be slower to it because it's just a highly regulated, massive capital infrastructure kind of business.
Yeah. Let me pause real quick, guys, and remind everybody of our Digital 360 Summit. It is coming up. It's been confirmed that it's going to be September 6th through the 9th. We're about to sign the agreement. It's going to be in Austin, Texas. We're going to sign the agreement. We have not, so I don't want to announce the venue, but it's one of the best venues in Austin to have an event. It's going to be huge. We're going to have federal, state officials keynoting. It's going to be very large, and it's going to be pretty similar to what it has been before. We'll have all kinds of folks attending and sponsoring and the like we had in 2021. Obviously, we will be showcasing by then a lot of the work. We have 4 of the 9 labs at Texas State that I've opened up. They're very exciting. It's starting to deliver some cool work. We have some big meetings about 3 of the next labs in the next week with some huge partners. And then I wanted to thank real quick, Texas State for sponsoring the Digital-Roundtable. John, any final thoughts on Craig and how he's using his powder? Are you going to invite him to be part of Texas Ventures or anything like that?
Absolutely. I think Craig is just doing outstanding. Look, this space is just dynamic. This space is continually moving. This space is political. This space is startups. It's established enterprises. And I think we're moving toward a hybrid kind of situation that would be very, very interesting. When all of a sudden the people who traditionally look for gas stations can't find them anymore, and the gas stations are now scarce, and the station for the EVs are there. So it's one of the most exciting spaces since the development of flight, in my opinion, because we just don't know. And Craig, there will be so many different business models that would develop.
Yep.
Because EV, and I'm predicting there'll be 350 makers of EVs in America, manufacturing. I mean, there's a company in Austin that's already ordered the 3D printing, because they're not complicated machines to make.
Nope.
Not at all. So I think you're in the right space, and I like what you're doing.
And Texas is really becoming an epicenter, both for the startups and companies and capital, but also as the demand for these things. I mean, I think what I heard is, as of next year or the year after, Texas will be the largest, have the largest amount of renewable energy produced of any state, passing California. And so it's happening here, and it's an exciting place to be, even though I'm sitting in California right now.
Llewellyn?
I echo all that. I'm not sure that that Texas is essential to this equation. It's going to happen anyway. It's happening worldwide. It is quite correctly, and I find myself in the awkward position of endorsing John's Sibley Butler. It happens from time to time. He shouldn't take it too seriously. But no, he's quite right. It's a very, very exciting time. The revolution is more complete and far-reaching than people recognize. I think what we haven't recognized is the downsides that all revolutions have. The businesses that will go to the wall, the professions that will be lost, etc. But there will be great new opportunities. I think one of the most interesting things we can see looking at the world today is that whereas many of us, including myself, thought that the digitization of everything would lead to a great loss of jobs. And in fact, there's a terrible excess of demand from workers. And so that should give John some comfort that I was wrong. And
You're doing good. You're doing good.
Right place, Craig, doing the right thing. And I think this is how it's going to be. When you can bring capital and ideas together, very good things result. So I salute you.
Yeah, I would say that the brilliant move of moving to Texas is the grid in Texas is standalone grid. And if this revolution is going to mature anywhere at a large scale in the US, it's going to be here first because of the autonomy of the grid itself in order to scale a lot of these, unknown technologies and unknown business models. And so I think that, I salute you also, and congratulations on everything that you have done, and looking forward to keeping in touch. And thank you again for being with us today.
I really appreciate it. This was great. Very enjoyable. You guys took it easy on me. So thank you.
John, take us away.
Gotta make the good old days good. I remember our old country home, clean, fresh air and flowers growing in the fields along the path to our swimming hole. Mama hollering through the stream with you like some homemade ice cream. That was a simpler place and place. Bluebell tastes just like the good old days. Speaking of the good old days, Bluebell tastes just like the good old days.
Yeah, Bluebell.
That is the
ice cream,
only
baby.
product that we make in Texas. I don't know where that came from.